Okay, hi. Hi, everybody. This is Maru. I'm going to let her introduce herself to you. I'm going to introduce her the way I'm going to. And it's good to have you here, even if you're watching later, or even if you didn't make it, even, strange and unusual ways. We were talking earlier, Maru and I, and one of the things that I have been coming up against, which is really interesting because I have a fairly decent level of being able to be articulate, is when I say the phrase, there are things we can't talk about, I don't mean it's a secret. I mean there's no way to frame certain realities that we are occurring in that don't fit with the model of reality that we were born into. They come from realities of unity. If you read the book, Language Creation, or the new one, You as the Mind of Creation. So one of the things that was really important in a way, again, that isn't easily comprehensible, is sometimes, or all the time actually, human beings are part of a larger mind of creation. They're part of a larger system of existence. And at least to date, I haven't noticed many human beings having those thought structures as being part of that themselves. So it felt important today for Maru and I to be together. For me, for three reasons. One is that she's from Mexico, and I'm from the United States of America. And we have governances that are challenging. So that could be a topic. The other one is that a long, long time ago, I don't remember how long ago, Maru, we had a kind of a shared dream, like what I would call a remembrance or a recall. And my part of the recall was us being in what turned out to be the fact Mexico City is actually like Washington, D.C., interestingly enough, I don't know if I just got the relationship, was basically built on landfill and I think a Great Lake, is that right? On a lake. And Washington, D.C. was built on landfill on a swamp. Interesting. Very curious, isn't it? And the memory I had of Maru, which does not leave me, is that we both had on very, very tall headgear, and we had long robes, and we were a little bit more elongated and thinner than we are in this form. And we were literally walking down these elegant steps into what we would call the bottom of the lake. It was more like into a ancient site that we were familiar with. So it's a very interesting thing to me all these years. There's not many people that I have recall like that with. So from the minute I met Maru, there was no way for me to operate with her. Actually, it was difficult sometimes to operate with her the way she knew herself now in the past, because my relationship with her dealt with this kind of amazing feminine, almost masculine feminine power that took care of things quietly and calmly and with great precision and great what I want to say is no either or, lots of both and then over the years, which I also don't remember how many, it was fascinating to watch her start to take on a technology that really fit with that feeling and that sense of reality that I had felt walking down the stairs with her. Now, is it the same? I have no way of knowing. We have recall from other lives or other existences. Since we're not there, I doubt seriously if we would have known chocolate back then. And so it just is easy to say that I don't have the complete recall of what how my mind would have worked back there then. But I do like the feel of what Maru's been engaged in, because it's something like resetting things back into their right order. Something like that. I'm being loose weaved in my language. So coming into this call today it has the third thing. So I mentioned who we are now as human beings and two governance, affected by two governances, who I remember as, and still move with you, move with her. I still move with her that way. And I enjoy it. I found this life I was born into, and this reality I was born into, very, it would be like a movie where you go back and these brilliant beings had been made into morons. And it's very hard on me. So when I have a recall, oh, shit. So when I have a recall, like the one I have with Maru, I pray we stay connected, because it's not just being connected to her, it's being connected to worlds that had things function here in remarkable ways. As our nature of being in unity with this planet and the cosmos. And so the third thing is that regardless of what we discuss or what we look at or what we be with each other, because we didn't make a script, we have no intent. I knew us being together today brought all that into the field of awareness in this moment. And sometimes it's not the data or the discussion. Sometimes it's the presence of something that lays beyond words. And I wanted it in there today. I wanted her and I here today at the bottom of that lake, whatever was down there then, that we could reset the field effectively with, so that humanity could live in harmony and peace and joy, and each having their own version of freedom. I think I want to say one more thing, and then whatever comes to mind for you, Maru, okay? And introduce yourself ever how you want to. One of the things that we live in now is what I call process to recover from something or to get to somewhere or to be something. But the worlds I remember didn't do that. We just beed. And when things torqued, we fixed them. Like you replace a battery in a flashlight. No big deal. I just want you all to know something was no big deal a long time ago. It's not really a big deal. Maru?
Oh, well, it's a real pleasure to be talking with you. I mean, we've talked before, we've talked, and I know we'll talk after words many times, but I thank you for the invitation to be here today. Well, I'm Maru is my short name, okay? I'm Maria Eugenia, and I was born in Mexico City, and I have all this mixed identities or lack of identity, maybe, of having European origin and also Native American, Mesoamerican, should I say, blood. And so it's interesting, even if I've been here all my life, and there has always been this sense of really not belonging, really not being where I am, or this not being my real home. And even as a little child, my father taught me the basic constellations and stars that were visible then. And he didn't have to repeat it. It was just once that he mentioned the names, and they stayed. And it was always looking up at the stars. When Mexico City had not so much light, and you were able to see stars. And we used to travel outside Mexico City, and you were even able to see the Milky Way. Now there's no possible way in which you can see the Milky Way. There's so much light everywhere during the night. And so I have always had this sense of being a foreigner everywhere. Doesn't matter where I go, I'm always a foreigner. And that day I recall when you mentioned that dream of us going down into the bottom of the lake, the sensation, because it was a sentience thing that I had perceived just before our talk, was of this sort of a mechanism like a clock with all these gears and just making them fit again. It was like trying to make them click again. And even my steps, as I was walking in the park, my steps were like trying to synchronize, trying to make this thing. And I couldn't make what it was until I talked to you a little bit later. And there's always this sense of saying, well, is there anything that can be done in order to get that world back in order? And for many years, I just suppressed everything that I can now have access to, basically because I think it was too painful to realize that this was the way the world is now and that you can't do anything about it. And it was sort of a coping mechanism, just to not remember what it could be, and even not remember who I can be or who I am. And but I think that life was so miserable, and I don't think that the things around me have made it so miserable. It was just a fact that I couldn't fit in, or that I wasn't really being who I am. That made me look for so many things, trying to find a through line and trying to find out who I truly was. And so it has been a journey, and I have tried things and such and this, and finally, I think it all began to make sense when I joined the Spirals. I don't know how many years ago, because I can't even remember how many
2014. 2014. Mm-hmm. Only date I remember. So
well, I actually joined you the following
right.
season or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know that it's, for most of us, listening to what you had to say had no sense at all. But nonetheless, we wanted to keep on hearing it. It's just like repeat it again and repeat it again until it finally hits home. But there's the sensation, this feeling that I got to listen to this again. I got to listen to this again, even if it doesn't make any sense. And I think that then things begin to shift because our energy field begins to be a little bit more receptive. It's less protective, or it's less interfered with. And we're able to begin to receive that information of who we truly are, and to really encourage us to look for who we really are. And it has been a journey. I mean, from you said 2014 or 15 until now, well, it's some years. And but everything has been building, like just on top and top and top. And now I find myself in a place where I really feel I can be, with certain precautions, because where I live, we are not very welcomed as questioning and questioning people or proposing for a different way of looking at things. Well, so with certain precautions, I can more easily be and present myself as something more than the girl that was born in Mexico City 59 years ago. So, so that has been the journey. I won't go back. I mean, I'm surprised at people saying that their childhoods or their college years were the best times of their lives. And I said, I wouldn't go back for anything in the world. I cannot. I'm much more myself, and I'm much more happier and fulfilled now than I was then. I wouldn't go back then. It was so frustrating. I would go back. So I'm very happy to be when I am right now. I don't know that.
You know, it's two things that came up for me. One, I think as you were talking, I was thinking, well, I'm just kind of pretending we're in a bubble, nobody's watching, and maybe nobody is watching. I mean, you never know on YouTube, but how much how relieving it is to be in the bubble. And all the while knowing, as what people are invited to do, eavesdropping could be occurring, do you know? I remember I was I don't know if I thought it was probably in high school. Just because of the memory was in my mother's living room. And once I left high school, I wasn't in that living room so much. And at that time, my revelation was, I don't think I'm human. It's as far as it got. But there was something that was a relief about that, because the world around me was so incredibly strange. Even how people talked was strange. And what people found important was strange, just strange to me. And then fast forward, I realized that I knew I was a creature not a creature like what people might imagine, that whatever I was in love, deeply in love with this planet, and deeply in love with something called human. So it must not be humans. Humans must not have been at the time I loved being human or loved humans the way they were when I was born. So that created a discrepancy that became exploratory for me. How could I love something that I said I wasn't if I didn't in some way knew it? That seemed incongruent. Then fast forward, over the years of, one of the things you and I have common is we think like scientists. You think like you have more quantum physics actuality study, but somehow I could sit in a room with having a scientist explain quantum physics to me for 6 hours while I fed him beer until I got the lingo, but the comprehension was there for me all the time, like with you. It's always there, that we were part of an extraordinary system of creation and that we reveled in it once upon a time. And something happened that had us not reveling in it or being the mind of it. And that set my path. But the interesting thing that came out of your conversation really started right after Lily died and when I got COVID and then I got post-COVID, because I settled in I must have a mission here because I certainly don't belong here. And so what happens for all human beings, that's the part I was thinking about before we got on the call. We talk about it as synchronicity or serendipity or coincidence or guidance or direction, but that is being part of the greater system of which we're a part. And every now and then it registers in us and we follow suit. But in 2020, there was a huge shift for me because the mission was complete, December 31st, 2020. And, there's no real reason for me to say what that mission was because it can't be heard. It's impossible to be heard. If you're thinking as part of the greater system of creation, then when you say a mission, missions seem to be human missions, not creation missions. And it's what qualifies me as a mystic. I can complete the mystical missions of creation, you could say. But then I confronted being here because I almost died for a long time, about a year. And from post-COVID, and I knew, and everything in me knew I wouldn't want to be here if something wasn't being restored. Like you, pretty much almost exactly the way you said it, that something was restoring. And I loved how you did your hands like that, because if we do this like humans here and the four powers and forces of creation, because everything else is creation itself, it was like I was feeling that, whether it's principles or systems or beings or galactic reconfigurations, it felt like something was clicking in together again. And you and I have that in common, that, wow, that's just got to get clicked back in. It was just paradise here when it was all clicked in like that. And, and then you met Sandra, and I'd had my Brians and my Josephs and my collaborators that aren't handicapped by what's happened here. And what as you became a teacher, I could see that, and it's really important to say it, that what you were learning was relevant to what you've been searching for. Might not be the whole thing, but it was relevant enough. And then I started doing the spirals because I knew that, I assisted Barbara Marx Hubbard setting up Evolve when she first started. I was one of her guides. And I just never forgot that small, cohesive island of human beings restoring their direct link with creation can create a whole new world with no one ever knowing, get no credit. Nobody runs, you don't run for office unless you do. And, but it works with the original nature, the original intelligence here. And you restore that original nature, that original intelligence. And voila, here we go. And then at a personal level, it was brutal to have 2 years of no work. And I don't do savings or anything like that. It's not the system I know. But what's been interesting, that at a personal level the last years, and once 2022 hit, I absolutely knew that I had completed the first, which is basically to create a triad of cohesive fields, minders, creators, architects. And the feel of it is it seeds something that can then remember itself and come back into existence here. It's nothing to do with human beings, but it lives in the nature of what human beings are when they're in unity with creation, in unity with each other, and in unity with life itself. So it's very technical for me. And I think that's one place we've always, been able to have juicy conversations, because we have that, okay, how do we fit this back together? How does it click again? And so, I was thinking before I got on this call, I wanted to make a public announcement, which I thought was strange because it won't be for the reasons people say. But I'm really, this whole section we're doing, these 7 weeks in CreateAWorld, has to do with our own merit. And our merit isn't why we're valuable to the world or why we're of worth to the world, because human beings are all valuable and all of worth. So it's not that. It's this feeling of this feeling of self, or what we're doing is of merit to us. And when it's of merit to us, there's an innate understanding it's of merit to creation. It isn't ego. I can't tell you how many people who I've been doing coaching with have said, this is not my ego. And yet the challenge is, the minute we have a sense of self, it sounds like you're egotistical in the present world. And I had one person last night that must have said it 40 times. And I let her, because I knew she was just making sure that I knew that she was experiencing the nature of her unity with creation, and that once she was capable of extraordinary things, and she wanted it back, wanted that merit back. So I've been willing to take a financial hit, and for the first time in my life, not sacrifice it in any manner, because my next journey is developing the archetype of human beings that once were the minds that worked with nature and principles and aspects of creation, as those gyroscopic clickers of keeping everything adjusted and everything protected, which I don't talk too much about. Everything protected, so the world never needs to know. That is the ancient magi and the ancient guardians, and it is part of what I call the realms of the beloved. And I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't be taking the constant nervousness of income if I didn't feel it materializing, if I didn't feel the matter of it, the merit of it materializing. And so there's a joy in it. There's a joy in willing to take the hit, because I don't want to dilute the finesse. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that there comes a time, and I've seen it in people that are doing engagements. This is why I want to try to get it said. Like I had a woman say to me, I think I have healthy PTSD. And I laughed. And I said, believe me, she had not had healthy PTSD. I said, why is your PTSD healthy? And she said, I could finally leave my job. I could finally leave my husband. It's all shocking, and I'm trembling and I'm terrified, but I can tell it's healthy, because I no longer have anything in me that is compromising who I am. And I think that's the threshold we're on. That's why we're calling this section build my merit. And I know it's that thing like the ego. It's like I can look at people who call me arrogant and egotistical, and mostly because I'm just paying attention to one thing, and it kind of looks like that. I must look like that to people. And I don't, I used to be in parties and I wouldn't even hear somebody talking to me because I was busy about in my head something else. And so there's this tricky gyroscopic clicking thing between really ego as we've defined it, but how come Freud said ego was the seat of the soul, that it was the soul identity of a human being? Maybe something got missed in translation. So I'm very excited at this point in time. And one of the things for the public is, Maru and I are trying to work out this syncing up of something so I can be more intimately related with the work that Sandra and she and others are doing, because I love those. I love the aspects of creation that are taking care of creation itself. And beings that used to take care of creation itself were kicked butt because they could do that. Everybody else had a world worth living in. It has nothing to do with politics or anything. It has to do with the systems of creation, staying operationally sound in their interface with human beings, and human beings interface with them. I think that's how we got religion and stuff, except that got a little torqued, maybe a lot torqued. Over to you. Now I can't wait to hear what you're going to say. What did I stimulate?
I think it really got, the way I see it is that we turned off or turned down much of our capacities and our perception of things because it was too painful.
I agree.
And I was talking the other day to one of my teachers in the Quantum Bioengineering Institute, and she said, well, why don't you do more? Why don't you go out into the public and say, well, I think I have this memory of having been silenced, say it nicely, several times before. And I think that's when I learned to remain quiet and not to be exposed. And I think that many human beings, probably not all, but many human beings have learned to remain silent.
And I think
and
that
oblivious of who we are.
Yeah, and I think, just to interrupt a little bit, because I want to get my 2 cents in here, is it for me, it's the why human beings have human beings being enemies. Like everybody has to have an enemy right now. It's like the social printout of this basic fundamental. It's one thing to know we got hurt by our mother when we were born, but then how come mother was hurt? And then how come mother before and mother before and mother before? Where was that moment where something happened, where we separated from creation? What forces came in? What got I'm not asking a question for you to answer. I'm just saying, that it's worth, like, what if we could get to that thought? And then we'd realize we all got aberrated. We all got hurt. We all are terrified, because it's one thing to be punched by a human being. And in your culture, you have memories of gods coming in and turning a harvest sacrifice into blood sacrifice. I mean, that's part of the culture of memory, real memory, not imaginative memory. And there's one thing to be terrified of and hate a human being. It's another thing to be terrified of something that might have started to take over here, that ruined or temporarily ruined the beauty of this place and its creatures. And so, that's sobering. That's sobering. And so when you say that, me too. I mean, I've stayed invisible the whole time. Everything I've ever done is referral. And not because I'm afraid, it's because I'm smart. Don't trigger the mechanism that takes things down here. Don't trigger the mechanisms that have life turn against itself. Don't trigger them. Leave them alone until that what gives life is strong enough that that those mechanisms have no power.
Well, there are 2 things on what you said. One is that effectively, and one of the things that Sandra stresses so much, is just being careful with these forces that would like to keep us to remain silent and still, and how to address that. That's one level, and it's true. The other thing is that I remember many years ago, I was still in another phase of my finding myself. And I was meditating one morning. Oh yeah, I remember. We were working with this thing about the relationship between me and my mother and how I felt not loved enough or something like that. And I went into meditation. I said, okay, now, when did you abandon me, let's say? And it was more of an asking of, when had God abandoned me? When had I been betrayed, let's say? And it was very clear. The answer was, you were not thrown out, you were not abandoned, you left because you wanted. I said, what? I mean, meditation ended in that second. And I said, what? And it took me a long time to understand that actually I had left unity, had left the whole, all that is, for individualization with an ego, exactly to experience what I've been experiencing through eons of time. But it was a personal decision, personal, that sounds like, a personal decision to forget, to split, and not be whole anymore, and feel or perceive that I'm separate from as an individual, okay? But that was the whole point. It's nothing wrong with it. It's nothing, it's just, at that time I felt, how could I have done that? Oh my God, there's something really wrong with me. But now I know there's nothing wrong with me. There wasn't anything wrong with me at that time either moment. It's just the experience of being a creator being and experimenting, experiencing, designing, playing. And so that takes away much of the drama, takes away much of the pressure or the of this feeling that there's something wrong with me or with the world. It's just, oh, we're just playing, we're experimenting. And it took me many years to really understand that leaving that wholeness, that unity of being one with as a complete sensation and experience, to feeling being separate, only to find out sooner or later that you're not really separate from, but you're really an expression of. And being an expression of, you have the freedom and the ability and the responsibility to create realities and to create things and to live thoroughly every creation, to live it thoroughly and not regret and not, I don't know, try to fix it.
Yeah, it goes back to our commandments. Oops, duh,
Yeah.
wee.
yeah, that's right. And that's true. And but when I see people in general, I mean, and I've been more in contact with more people recently, which is really sometimes stressful and scary because well, I was never a very social being, but with the event, the health events that we had for some years now, it was a perfect excuse for not being around people. And But now that I'm beginning to be in touch with more people, it's like, oh my God, I had forgotten how things were, where they were. and oh, and but I've been practicing this thing about being in those spaces and feeling how things ripple from me, and they have an impact on the environment or people without even saying much, just by being there. And that's an experience. And but there's always this kind of thing that say, how could I make them realize who they truly are?
Mm.
And I mean, when you consider all the political situation around everything, up there in the States, and I think that every country right now has the same problem, this polarization thing. And one of my teachers was saying the other day that it has to do with this liquidity of the culture right now, the world right now. We have lost all our references, our reference points, as we have talked frequently here. And that scares the ego, or scares our mind, because we work or we function using reference points. So if the family structure is disappearing, the political system is disappearing or not working, evidently not working. The economic system is not evidently working. What's good and bad, our moral standards, everything has been like crumbling down. So the only thing that the mind or the ego, or whatever you want to call it, can do is find opposition. And that is a reference point for me. If I find something that I'm against, then that is a reference point. And that's why right now we have so many confrontation and polarization, and because the mind is desperately trying to find reference points. Someone that can tell me what's wrong and what's correct, what's good and what's bad, what's appropriate and not appropriate, what's permitted and not permitted, because I don't have any reference points left from the ones I had before. So this is the liquidity of reality that pushes me and pushes everybody to try to find a reference point. And the easiest way is opposition.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's also forcing people at some point, which is now trickling through to conversation with me, is that it's forcing us back into who am I without that? And who am I? And the other word I would use is contrast. Like, not only in the softer part of the polarity is I'm just not that, or I am that. And then the more harsh part of the polarity is reference points have to be in opposition, because they can't soften an opposition, because then there's nothing. And I want to go back to something you said. Actually, I got really excited, which, I don't think it's sardonic humor, but we're about to find out. Because, I jokingly call myself a mystic, but one of the fundamental things why I can call myself that is I never had the experience you had. I never had that I separated from source, that I never had that I chose separation. Not that it's right or wrong, which is why I'm making this point, because we, in religion and spirituality, there's this condensed version of this is the only way you could have done it. This is the only story of what could have happened. But that's But we all came here because we were intrigued in some manner. And ultimately, ever how we did it, we came, and who knows if I made it up, when you started to diversify, to come in to be here, conditions here may have been in a way that once you came through the veil, you couldn't remember anymore, that you forgot. That's what I remember happening to human beings. And when I was a little girl, I didn't have that. I didn't have individuation. I had being part of a greater whole. And why couldn't anybody else see that? Why couldn't anybody see that? And the interpretation I took on was I was crazy, that I was actually crazy. And then some paranormal things happened, like a dove broke its neck. And when I was a little girl, I think I was 3 years old in preschool, and I picked it up and I didn't want it to be dead. And so its little neck went whoop, and flew away. And then I had the Baptist church at my door screaming I was the child of the devil, because one of the kids went home and told. So that if we could take everybody in this community that's listening, and I'm saying this to all of you, it'd be great to go back and see what your point of origin story is, that you can recall, that you can remember, because all of us came in here because something was attractive here. Something was yummy, sweet, adorable. We just didn't realize maybe the conditions of what had happened here in the meantime. It's like going to, a perfect example is, speaking of governance, is a story one of the members of the field of Tantra Mutt says about her mother and her going to Germany the day that the border closed. They couldn't get back home. But they didn't know the border was going to close. They were just going to visit their aunt. And so there's a lot that we don't know about what happened in the huge configurations of this moment in time. I've been watching this. I don't normally do this, but I'm now obsessed. I will say that right off. I've been watching Ancient Civilizations on Gaia, all 4 seasons, because they keep repeating the same thing, but what it's doing is it's stimulating pre-diluvian, that means prior to the flood memory. And somehow that prior to the flood memory has more reality for me than the post-flood. But it's also giving me the sharpest listening, because now I can hear post-flood conversation. And I can hear people, like I hear it in Sandra and you, I hear pre-diluvian conversations now. Like it's created a point of historic point, which I think is phenomenal. So in my chat, in my head, it's like, well, when did you come in? What was going on here? What do you think did happen? What was possible? What had lost? Was when after Atlantis it fell, or was it, there's a beautiful thing about Easter Island and South America and Central America and all this stuff. And it's because what I love about it is I think it has this ability for people to recall or remember, wow, that seems familiar. There's something about that. Maybe that kind of world was where I came from. So it's this whole thing about everything coming to the surface and all this liquid knowledge. I'm in love with that terminology now. All this liquidity of knowledge, I think is going to give us new reference points that are not this history centric, not this time centric, but kind of like, where did it all begin? Where did it all begin for me? And it all began for me long before, pre-diluvian, for sure. There's too much I relate to. There's just too much I relate to. I remember some of you don't know this story, and I don't say it to be egotistical. I say it because anybody listening to this, go look at what you remember and get out of this. There can only be one memory, and everything means that, imagine this diverse species only coming through one gate. That's it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And we all have genetic history that's not just human. It's a genetic history of being part of the planet. We're made from the substance of the planet. That history is in our bones here. And I always go back to Karnak. I almost died of that shock that you're talking about. Because when I was visiting with my husband, who was in a conference, and I remember walking down with the lions on both sides of me and just started to meet the guide sobbing like I was a mess. I didn't even know what the mess was. And I just wasn't the same body. I was this, again, elongated female. And then to have him come up to me and basically get rid of everybody and tell me that his uncle told me I would come. And then losing 6 hours of time because he took me into the part of the temple that nobody goes. And then coming into I went in a donkey cart and they were throwing these musical instruments, this little village, and throwing flowers on me. And what am I doing? I'm becoming psychotic. Because the woman married to the man living in Saudi Arabia and visiting Egypt was not the woman that they were so excited showed up again. And we were at a 5-star hotel, and they literally bring me up in the donkey cart with all the people yelling and shouting. And the guy comes down and takes me up to my room. And I remember standing there looking in the mirror, hating myself. And I didn't know why I hated myself. I didn't like who I'd become and who they loved. It's just as simple. And I called down and asked for scissors. I had hair down to my ass. And I cut it all away to my skull. Because I didn't deserve to be alive in that moment. It was horrible. And the guy, I don't know what you call him, the guy at the door, he came up later and he somehow understood what was happening to me and asked me if I'd be willing to go with him. And he wanted me to see something. And I went with him and he took me to where the Arabs were. I don't know how many, but they were watching the Arabian stallions dance in fire. It was amazing. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And he cuddled me, not physically cuddled, he cuddled me and a bunch of men, just sat me with the men and just had me watch the stallion in the fire. Next day I had pneumonia. I almost died of pneumonia in the next 6 days. So I'm just repeating this and sharing this with you again, because it's not silly to not be afraid. It's not silly when we begin to wake up again and we don't have the capacities we had once upon a time that took care of life here. It's not silly. I don't have a memory of an enemy, therefore I don't have enemy. Don't mess with me, but I don't have enemy. I just didn't come in that frame. I came before everything went awry here, and I came back and almost died of my internal suffering that's going to happen to this beautiful place. But all of us have that story. And I think, one of the richest things for me is I had said when I was younger in my 20s that I just hoped I found a few people where we could risk remembering each other. And I don't know what that is. I mean, I know the Tower of Babel where there's something, sometimes I wonder if it's dangerous for us to remember each other too. I don't have the answer, but I know how hard it is for us to remember each other. And, when we could remember each other back then, and then we could see the threads that brought us to this moment in time, that though they're still fragile and they're still delicate, that we somehow we didn't forget. And then for all of you that are watching, and we hardly know how to talk to each other when we're trying to figure out Sandra and how to meet in Shasta, or how to fit time in for people to do the work with Maru. It's like we're like these two bouncing balls slamming into each other all the time. because this kind of time doesn't fit with that kind of time. And it's just so tricky to try to make things work in linear time when something's happening in larger kinds of time. And but that thread stays in there. That thread stays in there, and I'm really appreciative. It's why I wanted you on today. I wanted that element in the conversation, you know? And I just hope human beings stop being so distracted by human beings and what human beings think is important, because we can see how important it is. It uses up our day with no return, you know? So we have 4 minutes. I'm turning it over to you.
Well, probably humanity is being forced into having time, because if all these structures really deconstruct as we are seeing, we will have a lot of time.
And isn't it interesting that you and I have so much on our plate right now, as if we're getting everything in time as fast as we can, because there's about to be no time.
Yeah, and I remember telling you some years ago when we were exploring teaching the language of creation here in Mexico, and I said, people are so busy just getting food, or chasing. And she said, you said, then it's not the time. I said, I think that people really have to crash and really realize that they have nothing, that everything that they have been pursuing, everything that they have been fighting for, or fighting against, or whatever, makes no sense. And then they can truly look within. And some people are reaching that point, not all, but I think that, and as harsh as it sounds, and that's you used to mention a word, the dakini in you. Okay. Mm-hmm. I find now that's sort of a dakini in me, combined with Lilith, okay, and combined with something else that says, let's bring everything down, let's deconstruct, and let's start again, okay? Just let's start again. Maybe it's not start again in a very rigorous sense,
or find a new floor. Find a new floor.
But we and the only way of finding a new floor for many people is really hitting the wall. I mean, mm-hmm. There's no other way. But we have to be here, prepared, and have all the.
I love you.
Love you too.
I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I love that part of my clearing my slate is to be able to be in alliance with you and be in alliance with Sandra and see what we can. Well, that's not that goes said that way. It doesn't fit with the right lingo in our present reality. It will be a joy. It is a joy, and it will be a joy. Thank you. I love the skinny branches with you. That's what I wanted to say. I love the skinny branches with you. Have a good day, honey.